God prepared.
God prepared.
God prepared Abraham with a desert journey.
God prepared Jonah with a great fish.
God prepared Moses with a Pharaoh's court.
Esther with a lavish banquet.
Ruth with a barren field of barley.
Isaiah with a fiery coal.
God prepared Joseph with a powerful dream.
God prepared Martha with a kitchen mess.
God prepared Peter with a load of fish.
God prepared the disciples with an upper room.
Hannah with an answered prayer.
Paul with the Damascus road.
Are you
prepared to change your habits?
Prepared to change your marriage?
Are you prepared to change your school year?
Are you prepared to change your business?
Are you prepared to change your relationships?
I have a couple things I want to let you know, and the first one is this. You are about to hear the shortest message that you have ever heard at Bayside. Hold your applause. Yeah, look at this applause. Because once a year, we do kind of a cool thing. We let our church, we let everybody out 15 minutes early, which means at the end of this service, you have 15 minutes of a little thing called free time. And we only have one rule. You can't make a mad run for your car. Okay, we have 30 different ministry booths out there, and they're all kind of waiting for people to. And why is this a big deal? Okay, heard a guy. Anybody know who Bud Wilkinson is? Former football coach, kind of a big deal. A reporter interviewed him one time on the sideline, and the reporter said to Wilkinson, he said, you could tell this reporter was fresh out of journalism school. He's on national TV probably for his first time, and he had put a mic in his face and said, what has been the contribution of professional football to the life and health of the American people? And Wilkinson looks at the kid and just goes, absolutely nothing. And you can tell the kid's going, what do they teach me to do in journalism school? And he said, why? And Wilkinson goes, here's my definition of pro football. 22 men on the field in desperate need of rest, while 50,000 people sit in the stands and watch, desperately in need of exercise. That's football. And when I heard that, I thought, what a great definition of the average church. A few people running around frantically serving everybody, while the vast majority of people who are in desperate need of serving God sit in the stands and spectate. Okay, so guess what? Turn to the person next to you and say, those days are over for you. Ready, go. We have set up 30 different ministry booths outside. You are going to hear a very short message, and then we're going to turn you loose. And if any of you think you're going to your car, we have people stationed in the parking lot, dressed like they look from Duck Dynasty with shotguns, okay? Now, grab your message notes out, get ready to go, because I got to roll, okay? 3 things I want to let you know in advance. Number 1 is John Ortberg is coming in a week on Monday night. It's a men's deal, but the whole church is welcome. Don't miss it. It's going to be really good. Second is, in 2 weeks, we launch the Freedom Project. You'll hear about that in detail next week. And third, and this is a really big deal, our North Campus is launching. We've never seen anything like it. You'll hear about a dinner that we're doing that's a really neat thing in a few minutes. Now, grab this out. We are going to take a look at Joshua chapter 1 on our Prepare series. And just look up here for a second. I need to set the stage. The whole Bible changes the minute the page turns to Joshua chapter 1. The whole Bible changes. Okay? First 5 books of the Bible, the Pentateuch, are over. And everything changes. Because for hundreds of years, God's people have been in deep trouble and distress because they've been slaves in Egypt under an oppressive regime run by the top guy who was the Pharaoh. So bad, they cry out to God for help. And after they cry out to God for help, God says, I've heard their cry. I'm going to send a deliverer. Go to a different scene. This guy named Mo, he's just wandering around the desert looking at some sheep. All of a sudden he says, whoa, why is that not burning out? So he walks over and this bush is on fire, but it's not getting consumed. So he walks over to check this thing out, and he hears a voice say, take off your shoes. You're on holy ground. That's why I believe it's okay to go barefoot to church. And here's this voice, and then God says, I'm going to free my people. I'm going to send somebody to stand up to the most tyrannical leader in the land. And Mo, I picked you. He's like, you got to be kidding me. And God says, hey, don't worry. I know it's a tough gig. I got a couple things to give you. Here's a stick. Oh, great. That's going to be really helpful. Oh, hold on. This is no ordinary stick. Throw it on the ground. Watch what happens. He throws it on the ground, turns into a snake, which to me, things just got worse. Okay? And he goes, now pick it back up, and it'll turn back into a staff. Are you going to pick up the snake? Not me. And Moses finally gets cajoled by God, and he goes and stands in the presence of the most powerful man. And he says, God has a message for you, and here's the message. Let my people go. Pharaoh says, no. God says, oh. And Pharaoh makes a strategic mistake in this conversation. Pharaoh says to Moses, who is the Lord that I should obey him? Well, God, being God, of course, overhears this and decides to show Pharaoh exactly who he is by giving him 10 audio-visual demonstrations. They're called the plagues. Frogs are everywhere. Flies are everywhere. And 10 plagues later, Pharaoh says, thanks for coming. Get out of town. And a couple million people follow Moses. And here's what's supposed to happen. They're supposed to be in the promised land for a while, learn a couple lessons, and then a year later, I'm supposed to be in the wilderness, then a year later, go in. And the problem is this, they send out spies. They send 12 of them, and then they get a majority report and they get a minority report. And the majority is frequently flat wrong. I don't want to get into politics right now, so we're going to keep moving. The 10 spies come back and go, yeah, hey, man, the land is awesome, but we shouldn't go. Why? They're huge. 2 guys come back, Joshua and Caleb, and they're going, yeah, they're big. God's bigger. Get after it. We got to go. Well, the majority wins. And they end up stuck for 40 years. 40 years of frustration. 40 years of failure. 40 years of knowing there was a better place to be, and 40 years of not being able to get there. And I don't know about you, but I feel that occasionally, don't you? Anybody here? The most frustrating thing in life is to know this could be better, but somehow I can't get there. My life could be better, but somehow something's stopping me from getting there. My health could be better. My shape could be better, but somehow I don't somehow ever get there. My finances could be better. My marriage could be better. Me and God could be better. My spiritual life could be better. My emotions, I could be better. I am tired of being stuck here. I'd really like to be there. How do I get there? That is, does anybody ever feel like this other than me? That is Joshua chapter 1. It's an awesome, awesome chapter. And I want to give you the entire sermon in a sentence. And this is actually a 40-year sermon in a sentence. You all ready for this? Write it down at the bottom. Why were they stuck? Why were they in neutral? Why were they frustrated? Why had they failed? One reason. Here it is. You will never possess what you are unwilling to pursue. You will never possess what you are unwilling to pursue. I know people that will never possess a great relationship with God because they won't pursue God. I know Christians who will never possess a really strong relationship with their Bible because they will never pursue the kind of things that would cause them to learn it. I know people that will never possess really good friendships and they kind of go, I don't know, maybe it's just me, maybe nobody likes me. No, they don't pursue the kind of things that would lead to those friendships being possessed. This makes sense? And in Joshua chapter 1, I love this chapter because God says to Joshua, you can break the chains. You can move forward. Everything can change. And here are 3 things that if you pursue these, you will possess better days ahead. And so I just want to give them to you. All ready for this? The first one you can write right in your notes at the top of that. How do we get right underneath? How do we get from here to there? And here it is. The first thing, interestingly, God says to Joshua to actually go after is possess the promises of God. He says to pursue the promises of God. And it's interesting to me, he starts there. And I got a question. Why does he start there? He doesn't give them a map. He gives them fuel first. Why? Check this out. After the death of Moses, the servant of the Lord said to Joshua, son of Nun, not a Nun, but the son of Nun, Moses' aide, saying, Moses, my servant, is dead. Now then, you and all these people cross the Jordan into the land I'm about to give them to the Israelites. I will give you every place where you set your foot, as I promised Moses. Your territory, now he's pouring out these promises. He says, your territory will extend from the desert to Lebanon, from the great river, the Euphrates, to the Hittite country, to the Mediterranean Sea on the west. That's roughly 300,000 square miles. Then he says, pours on some more promises. Nobody will be able to stand against you all the days of your life. That was their fear that kept them stuck for 40 years. As I was with Moses, I will be with you. I will never leave you, and I will never forsake you. Why is this so important? Look up here. When you pursue the promises of God, you will possess inner strength. And that's what it takes to go forward. This principle is all through the Bible. My favorite message to preach out of the last year was about a month ago when I preached on David, Goliath, and the people, and I contrasted fear and faith. Let me put a chart up here because it's the same exact principle. How do you stay stuck? How do you stay stuck and frustrated for 40 years? You know what you do? Number one, I just make sure I'm focused on my problems. And the spies were like, they're huge. That's all they were focused on. And then when a person focuses on their problems, then they expect only defeat. You usually get what you expect. Now, that was true with David and the people of Israel. It's also true in this setting, okay? Now, what's interesting is, how do you go forward? How do you cross the Jordan River? How do you get from here to there? Instead of focusing only on problems, I switch to the promise of God. And that means instead of expecting defeat, I can anticipate God's help, and then everything changes. And if I can just get real with you for a second, I preach to myself all the time. Does anybody in here ever get discouraged? Okay, me too, pretty much on a daily basis. And you know what's been great? For about the last 3 months, every single time I've gotten discouraged, and it's probably daily, at some point I'll stop and I'll go, wait a second, Ray, you know better than this. Why am I discouraged? Why am I stuck? Why am I miserable? And you know what? I actually preach to myself. I'll go, Ray, are you focusing just on your problems right now? Yes. Are you expecting only defeat right now? Yes. Good. That's why you're bummed out. Now, focus on my promises and start anticipating me to help you and get on with your future. It has been awesome to preach to myself. You all just get to listen in. Okay? And now, why is this such a big deal? It's interesting to me. God doesn't give them a map first. He gives them the fuel. And why is this such a big deal? Maybe the best way to describe it is this. Does anybody in here, anybody other than me, you just hate paying your PG&E bill? Anybody else? I don't know whether it's because we live in Granite Bay or, we have 4 kids and they're all energy consumption people. But our bill's insane, okay? I mean, like if we're not even there, it's $300 a month. just for existing. Is anybody else like with me on this? Okay. And then we had a bill one time, I think it was $1,100. You know, and I'm Mr. Turn the light guy off, so I follow kids around. You know, I drove everybody crazy. And then I discovered we have a guy at Bayside that puts solar on homes. And so about a year ago, he ran all this kind of stuff. And so he put solar on. So get these panels on the top of our house now. It's awesome. Our energy bill last month, $27. Yes. Matter of fact, after I got that, I walked out, I looked up at the solar panels, I went, hey, you guys are doing a great job, keep it up. And I gave them a standing ovation. And you know, and then I started thinking, what do solar panels do? It's like the easiest gig in the world to be a solar panel. All you do is you lay there in the light, soak up the rays from the sun, and because you do that, it produces power. If that doesn't preach to you, nothing else will. He says to Joshua, be still, focus on my promises. In other words, get into the presence of God. Live in the light. Let the light of the promises of God start being taken in by your life, and it will produce all the power you need to go forward. Does that make sense? Most people don't need a map. They need the fuel because they secretly know which direction they ought to be going. They just didn't have the power to get there. That make sense? I got to get moving. That's point one. Point one is when you pursue the promises of God, you will possess inner strength. Second point is this, and it's harder. Here it is. It's courageous obedience. First thing he says is, you're going to need fuel. Then he says, you're going to need a map. Here's the map, courageous obedience. And if you pursue obeying God, you will possess being a God-honoring person. That's why he says this, be strong and courageous because you will what? Circle the word lead. You will lead these people to inherit the land I swore to their forefathers to give them. And then a second time he says, be strong and very courageous. Be careful to obey all the law of my servant Moses to you. Don't turn from it to the right or the left, that you may be successful wherever you go. A third time he says to them, have I not commanded you? Be strong and courageous. Don't be afraid. Why is this such a big deal? Why does he come back to this? Here's the deal. It takes fuel to get started. It takes strength and courage to keep going. Okay? And I love this because if you ask the question, what does it mean to be fully obedient to Christ? What does it mean to really be a God-honoring person? He puts it in two different ways. He says, be strong and courageous because you'll lead, and be strong and courageous. I want you to be careful to obey. Now, I'll put up a chart up. What he's saying here is this, Joshua, I want you to lead effectively. I want you to lead in a God. Every single one of you is to be making an impact. That's the impact of your life. It's the influence of your life. Then he says, now, I want you to be strong and very courageous. Be careful to what? To obey. He says, it's not enough just to lead effectively. You've got to live effectively. And here's what he's really saying. Leaders who lead well but don't live well are hypocrites. But a lot of God's people live well, they just don't lead well, so they're useless. And God is saying, what would the world look like if every person that followed me lived and led in God-honoring ways? The world would have models and it would be impacted. Isn't that great? So the million-dollar question is this. How do I live and lead effectively? Where do I get the instructions? Glad you asked. Verse 8, do not let this book of the law depart from your mouth. You know what he's saying? Lay it around and soak it in. He says, meditate on it day and night. Lay around and soak it in so that you may be careful to do everything written in it. Then, circle the word then. Then you'll be prosperous and successful. Why is this? I put a little round chart in there. Everybody see that thing? Now, why is that in there? I read a very influential book in my life years ago by a guy named Fred Smith, a Christian businessman, brilliant, discerning, wise person. And he read something, at first I didn't get it. He said, I used to think being a person of integrity, he said, I thought integrity was a cantaloupe. He said, I figured out integrity is not a cantaloupe, it's a grapefruit. Everybody got it? I'm like, what? So he said, I used to think integrity was like a cantaloupe. You either had it or you didn't. And he said, then I met so many people that had a lot of integrity in one area but no integrity in another area of their life. He said, I met business guys, 100% financial integrity in every single business transaction. You could trust them with all that kind of stuff. And on the road, they were a whole different person sexually. And he said, I realized somebody can have 100% integrity in one area and none in the other area. And it's not a cantaloupe. It's an individual sliced thing with grapefruit. I heard that and I went, by the way, would you agree with him? He's absolutely 100% right. And I thought our lifelong task as Christians is to do this. See that circle right there? It is to take the Word of God and then let it impact every single individual area of my life. Does that make sense? We will be coming back to this over and over and over again when we do the verse-by-verse teaching out of 2 Timothy, okay? But the call is this: take the Word of God and let it invade every area of my life. You know what's good news about this? It's never too late to let God invade every area of your life and let His Word shape every area of life. It's never too late. Now, he says, first of all, I want you to pursue the promises of God. Second, I want you to pursue what he says is courageous obedience. Now, third thing he says to pursue is this: the promises will get you fuel and get you started. Courageous obedience, that's the map. And then the third thing he says is this: you've got to pursue living for God's purposes. He says, Joshua, and all through the book, he says, I want you to pursue living not for yourself, not for fame, not for financial, he says, I want you to pursue the greater purposes of God, to the point where the highlight of the book of Joshua is in Joshua 24, verse 15. He says, but if serving the Lord, I love this verse. He says, if serving the Lord seems undesirable to you, then choose for yourselves this day whom you're going to serve. Whether the God your ancestors served beyond the Euphrates, by the way, that's the gods out of their background. That's what they've grown up with. Sometimes, in my case, and maybe some of your cases, you've got to serve a whole different God than your family God, than your background. And then he says, or the gods of the Amorites, that's their current culture, in whose land you're living. And then would you read this out loud with me? Here we go. But as for me and my household, we will serve the Lord. Serving God is such a foreign thought to most church people. I want to take a minute and unpack 4 different ways that serving God will impact your life. And then we're going to cut the sermon short and unleash you to go out and connect so you can serve God, use your spiritual gifts somehow in ministry around it, okay? Number 1, living for the purposes of God will motivate you. Living for God's purposes will motivate you. Most folks aren't living for the purpose of God. Pretty much they're living to be a couch potato and relax and watch television. I read an unbelievable stat. Women, I want to know if you agree with this. The average American man will change channels 325,000 times in his life. Some of you going, that's probably just a good week. I actually believe this. Every single thing in your life can be going very well, but if I'm not living for the purpose of God, I can slip into despair because I don't have any greater purpose. One of the most famous cartoonists of the time, Ralph Barton, put it like this. He said, I have had few difficulties, many friends, great successes. I have gone from wife to wife, from house to house, visited great countries of the world, but I am fed up with inventing devices to fill up 24 hours of the day. He pinned that note to his pillow and then shot himself and killed himself. He had everything except purpose. Second, living for God's purposes will keep your priorities straight. They will keep your priorities straight. If you summed up what most folks live for, it's some combination of either fame or finances. And by the way, you know what? Anybody here been to your class reunion? Anybody ever been to your class reunion? Okay. Everybody learns one thing. All the heroes are now zeros. Figure this out? Living for God keeps your priorities straight. Okay? Number 3, living for God's purposes will actually strengthen your faith. Living for the greater purposes of God will strengthen your faith. It doesn't take any faith to do tomorrow what I did yesterday. When I step out and start serving, or I listen to the call of God and God says, now launch this. I had a great conversation day before yesterday. A pastor from Texas called me. Really great church down in Texas. And he said, hey, I've heard a bunch of stuff that's going on there, and I want to ask you some questions because we're going to do some of the stuff you guys are doing. So we had this incredible conversation. And then at the end, he goes, well, just give me an overview of what's happening. So I told him about all the stuff here, and I told him about, it's 8 services on this campus every weekend, all this kind of stuff. And then I told him about our Apex program with teenagers, and then I told him about whoever wins the kids wins the community. Here's what we do to that. Then I told him about the 60 acres across there, and we needed millions of dollars, and it actually happened, all this kind of stuff. And then I told him, I said, we're launching this North Campus. It's insane. We went up there, set up for 700 people, 650 people, and 1,850 people show up. And finally, he just goes, after hearing all this, he goes, Ray, can I just tell you something pastor to pastor? And I go, yeah. And he gets real quiet for a minute, and he says, I just want to tell you, you're not that good. He goes, you're not that good. And I said, you have it exactly right. You have it exactly right. This isn't my deal. And he said, what's it feel like? And I said, you want to know the honest truth? I said, being at Bayside, it's like surfing. No surfer in the water causes the wave. If any surfer thinks he's a big enough deal to have caused the wave, he needs to have his head examined. All you do is ride the waves that God brings in. This has not been the creation of any human being. Nobody's slick enough to think this stuff up. This is a wave of the Spirit of God, and it's our job to just try to stay in front of it or ride it, or in my case, get knocked over by it and rolled up on the beach. Does this make sense? And what happens is this: when you start saying, okay, God, I will serve. Have you ever prayed this prayer? I will serve where you tell me to serve. I will do what you tell me to do. I will give what you tell me to give. All of a sudden, it stretches your faith, and life turns into this unbelievable adventure where people are calling you saying, you're not that good. And they're absolutely right. Number 4 is this. Hey, our staff, would you all come in? Come on, send them on in. Release the hounds. We're going to bring our whole staff. This is going to be cool. We're going to bring our whole staff in here, introduce you to our staff, and then cut them loose to go to the booth so you can go connect with them afterwards, okay? And so come on in. Can you all pay attention to this last point while people are walking in? Yeah, sure. Here we go. Last one is this. Living for God's purposes will not only motivate you, keep your priorities straight, strengthen your faith, they will also satisfy you. Living for the purposes of God will satisfy you, because I believe this: a life without greater purpose isn't even worth living, and when somebody tries it, they can be famous and have everything, and they're miserable. Check this incredible quote out that's on the screen. Mark Twain, raise your hand if you heard of Mark Twain, okay? Shortly before his death said this, the most depressing quote I've ever read. You all ready for this? Here he says, a myriad of men are born. They labor and sweat and struggle. They squabble and scold and fight. They scramble for mean advantages over each other. Age creeps upon them. Infirmities follow. Aren't you glad you came to church today? Those they love are taken from them, and the joy of life is turned to aching grief. It, the release or death, comes at last, the only unpoisoned gift earth ever had for them, and they vanish from a world where they were of no consequence, a world which will lament them a day and forget them forever. Why settle for that when you could live your life fueled, focused, and living for things that are going to have an impact for all of eternity?